Hello everyone, welcome to my Outlast Insane Difficulty walkthrough. And this is going to be the full game, because this game is incredibly short. And I did specify in my Last of Us walkthrough that I would do a walkthrough of this game to really get my thoughts on the Outlast series in this video. And I'll be doing the Whistleblower DLC, which took me no time whatsoever. And I haven't gotten started on Outlast 2 yet, but Outlast 2 is going to be a joke, even though there are some really bullcrap parts of Outlast 2's design, because that game is nowhere near as good in its design compared to Outlast 1. But just to give you an idea as to what Insane Difficulty is, it's essentially Nightmare Difficulty, but with no checkpoints. So it is the pinnacle of laziness, and the worst part is, the Outlast series embraces a lot of unskippable moments. All the cutscenes are completely unskippable. There's a lot of moments where you're having to wait for events to play out, and it just wastes time. That's all it does. And I really have no respect for the cutscenes on this game, so I've trimmed out most of the cutscenes on this game. I'm only leaving in certain cutscenes where I really feel like they need to be discussed with how stupidly they're portrayed. And yeah, that's how the editing process is going to go for this. And there's a jump scare, which is something that the Outlast series embraces to such a really stupid degree that it's almost like the developers weren't really confident with what they were trying to bring out. So instead of really giving us a more fleshed out experience, they just filled this whole entire game, Outlast the Whistleblower and Outlast 2, with just a lot of jump scares. So much so that the jump scares are needed to actually trigger certain moments where the scripting needs to progress. And this is the case heavily with Outlast 2. Like, I remember there's a sequence in Outlast 2 where you're inside the school area in a hallucination sequence, and you have to trigger the jump scare with Father Ludermilch in order to progress the sequence. It's so dumb that it works that way. And just to give you an idea as to how difficult Insane Difficulty is not hard in Outlast and Outlast the Whistleblower. But in Outlast 2, because of the kind of bullcrap that it embraces, Insane Difficulty can be really, really annoying, but one thing that I do like about Insane Difficulty on this game compared to Outlast 2 is Insane Difficulty has one checkpoint in Outlast 1, and there's also one checkpoint in Outlast the Whistleblower. So the checkpoint for Insane Difficulty in Outlast 1 occurs after the little intro cinematic where you're driving the car, and I think that's really cool. In Outlast the Whistleblower, the checkpoint for Insane Difficulty is after you do the prologue sequence. So you don't have to sit through that prologue sequence every time you want to retry Insane Difficulty. For some reason, that mentality didn't apply to Outlast 2. In Outlast 2, they make you do the stupid intro cinematic moment where you're just doing that walking sequence and then you're in the helicopter. And that is just so stupid that they decided to opt for that for Insane Difficulty. And it's one of the main reasons why Insane Difficulty in Outlast 2 is just really stupid and there's no replayability whatsoever if the game's forcing you to do that little cinematic moment every single time. But I haven't been discussing what's been happening in the gameplay because it's all been really simple, and I'm about to show you a trick for dealing with Chris Walker in this section. So the game wants you to hide in the locker, but I'm not going to indulge the game. I'm instead going to use this method right here where I'm going to let Chris Walker damage me because he doesn't kill you when he busts through the door, and because he's in recovery frames, I'm able to run past him. And Chris Walker will kill you instantly on Nightmare Difficulty and Insane Difficulty. He will just go to a grab animation where he'll just grab you and take your head off because that's just what he does. And that's something I'm able to bypass, thankfully, because he's in recovery frames. And one weird thing about Chris Walker's door-breaking animation is his active frame period is extended longer than usual compared to the normal variant. Like, we're going to be encountering a variant in this section, and variants are just the normal patients that you encounter inside of Mount Massive Asylum. And when he busts through the door, his active frame period isn't so long, so I'm able to run past him. But with Chris Walker, even after he's fully completed his animation, there's still a period of time where he's still going to do damage to you. So, right there. That point at which I ran past him, Chris Walker would have damaged me. It makes no sense. It's very odd that it works that way, and I'm not even going to bother closing the door because the variants do not kill you in one hit on the Nightmare and Insane Difficulty. They kill you in 2 hits. But when they damage you, they gain a tremendous confidence boost, and it allows them to run very fast. Or it's just that your character is just incredibly weak from the hit, so that's why they're running a little bit slower. But you can dodge on this game, and that's one of the things I do like about the Outlast series. I like that it's a game series that doesn't rely so much on a lot of these artificial handicaps for the enemies, so you can actually dodge them, and it makes them lethal to some extent. But even still, though, you know, I can't really respect the lethality of the enemies if they have this much trouble killing a guy who can't even fight back for some really stupid reasons. And this guy shouldn't even be alive. Like, Miles Upshur, Waylon Park, and then Blake Langerman, they shouldn't be like alive at all if they're not going to be able to fight back whatsoever. They'd be dead upon first starting the game. It makes no sense. If you were to put such individuals in the Resident Evil series, they'd be dead on the first level, because if they can't fight back, there is no way they're going to survive any kind of outbreak. And, you know, there's never any situation on this game where you're forced to fight back, because that's just the simulated nature of this game, and that's why I refer to the Outlast series as a horror simulator rather than a survival horror series. I mean, Outlast isn't a good survival horror series, but it's definitely the best horror simulator series because you're fast, and the enemies are very fair. But I think they're only fair because they're simplistically designed in this game. I mean, in Outlast 2, they do encourage a lot of sliding and using the prone to your advantage when it comes to dodging. And that definitely complements the faster pace of Outlast 2, even if the incentive for using the dodges was pretty stupid, because on Outlast 2, the enemies could glide toward you to attack because they utilize the paired animation system, and it's very bullcrap that they can do that. In Outlast 1, that's not the case. Like, just then, he did not glide towards me because he doesn't utilize a paired animation system, he's utilizing a hitbox-based system, so he's going to be standing still when doing his attacks. But at the same time, it's very easy to exploit, because you can back up and completely avoid the attack. You do not have to jump backwards. I just like doing it because I just find it to be a lot more logical. You know, I'm surprised that the enemies don't have a lot of forward momentum with their attacks. But of course, I think that's there to complement the horror aspect that this game goes for, where they're trying to really make the enemies feel a lot more threatening than they actually are. And I'm demonstrating just how gimped these enemies are, because my playstyle for this game is I run very fast all the time, I dodge all the time, because the enemies are not very lethal on this game. This is a trick that the developers try to put upon you, and it's why I can't really call this game a good survival horror series, despite it being a great horror simulator series, because when you play a lot of horror simulator games like Soma or Amnesia, they're very slower paced games, and they're very boring to play, and the enemy types are very simplistically designed, and they're very bullcrap, and they just drag on for such a long time. This is not that at all. I think Red Barrels did a good job of making a really good horror simulator series. Oh, by the way, right here, this is very risky what I'm about to do. So, these two enemies, these two naked twins, they will instantly kill you. But if you run towards this guy, he doesn't seem to do his instant kill attack. He'll try to swipe at you, and if you jump back at the right moment, you'll dodge him. And because of the fact that the enemies give you a grace period whenever they attack, they don't attack you immediately. The only exception to this is with Traeger. The moment Traeger initiates an attack, he doesn't really have a lot of recovery frames. He's able to initiate an attack after he does an attack. This is not the case with every other enemy. Every other enemy on this game, they give you a grace period. In Outlast 2, every enemy behaves like Traeger, where they do not give you a grace period after they attack. So, it's why you have to be very fast when it comes to getting away from enemies after you dodge. But Chris Walker is attacking us, and we're going to experience a lucky pass moment. And personally, I don't really understand why Chris didn't kill you when he first grabs you when you're inside of the lobby area. You know, there's moments like that that don't make any sense. Like, for instance, there's a sequence in Outlast 1 where you're being attacked by the Wall Rider after you open that door, and the Wall Rider doesn't kill you, he just goes away. Why he doesn't kill you, I don't understand. And that's one of my biggest criticisms with the Outlast series, the fact that they embrace a lot of lucky pass moments as substitutions for moments where the characters are forced to fight back, or for moments where they're supposed to be dead. You know, it really takes you out of the experience. It really makes you not respect the lethality of the enemies when the main character is being saved by an invisible force all the time. And, you know, there are sequences like that in like the Resident Evil series, but they're so rare, and it makes total sense for that to be the case. Because, of course, the main characters are able to fight back in the Resident Evil series, and as such, the lucky pass moments are very rare. But in a game series where you're not able to fight back whatsoever for some really dumb reasons, it's why you get a lot of these lucky pass moments. Oh, by the way, there's going to be a sequence coming up where a guy grabs you, and he's going to get pushed up by the other inmate that's inside of the cell there. This scene on the PC version is different. Miles is actually the one that pushes this guy off, and they completely changed it in the console version. I imagine they did that because they wanted to complement the whole idea of the main character not being a killer whatsoever, but I think it's a really stupid justification. Like, I put a post on Red Barrels' Twitter page commenting on a post somebody left where they showcased a sculpture of Miles holding a crowbar, and I'm just like, it's very funny that Miles is holding a crowbar considering that he's been using like nothing in the environment to keep him safe from the patients. He probably thought the patients were just playing a game with them. And Red Barrels replied to my post saying that Miles is a lover, not a fighter, which is the most meme-worthy statement ever from Red Barrels. So, Their idea of Miles being a lover and not a fighter is very odd, considering that Miles utilizes a lot of anger in his notes, he curses a lot, and he even mocks villains after their death. Like, he hated Dr. Trigger so much, he wished for Trigger to be dead, and then when Trigger died, Miles mocked him by saying, "How to make Trigger juice? Squeeze." Like, does that really sound like a lover? Does that really not sound like a fighter? It makes no sense what Red Barrel said in their post. And furthermore, are they saying that Miles loves the fact that the patients are being psychologically tortured, and he loves that they're suffering? Like, they're not very clear whatsoever as to what they meant when they said Miles is a lover, not a fighter. And that's just how they are. They like to respond to a lot of people's posts with very immature and adolescent comments that they oftentimes come across as a company that doesn't really know how to take themselves seriously at times. And it's very interesting that that kind of developer would make this kind of horror simulator series, and I guess that's kind of why a lot of people consider this to be the best and scariest horror game out there, when in actuality, just looking past all the smoke and mirror aspects, this game is not really that scary. When you factor in the lucky pass moments and the enemy's inability to kill one man who can't even fight back, and other things like that, that just seems very goofy when you think about it. And this right here, I'm going to mantle past Chris Walker when he mantles. I like doing stuff like that in survival horror games, and even in these horror simulator games, because it shows that you're looking past the smoke and mirror aspects, and you're understanding a design that you can use to your advantage. This is apropos to the whole idea of people overcoming their own self-doubt in order to conquer their fear in just that brief moment to do something like that. And that's exactly what any true survival horror player would do, or anyone who looks past what a lot of these horror simulators try to opt for. And also, when you interact with that valve and you come back through this squeeze-through area, Chris Walker's not in the environment. He's going to spawn right here, and I'm going to use this to my advantage because he's always going to come in this direction. And then I can use this spot right here in order to get past him, because he's never going to come down over near this hole over here. So, that's the end of this section. It's so simple. This whole entire game is incredibly simple, and I have to say, I'm not really a fan of Chris Walker. Chris Walker is not very interesting as a character because he has just the most cliched methodology ever, just taking people's heads off, and he's just a very boring character, and he doesn't really have any kind of eccentric personality. Of course, there is such a thing as too much eccentricity, because Trigger was just very annoying, and he was just there just to serve as a joke, while also being this so-called scary person, when he's honestly one of the most throwaway villains ever. I mean, he was featured in the comic, and I know he tried to rape one of the Murkoff personnel, and, you know, I'm honestly surprised that Murkoff has as many bad individuals working within the company. Like, the percentage of chance of having every single employee of a company being a sociopath is exceedingly high. That would almost imply that the owner of Murkoff is a sociopath themselves. But of course, when you factor in just what people are capable of and just the kind of inhumane experiments that people do, like, behind the scenes. I mean, look at what the Nazis did in Nazi Germany, and then they had to enforce the Nuremberg Code to prevent those inhumane trials. Of course, then again, Murkoff is taking influences from a Nazi doctor named Dr. Wernicke, who was doing very inhumane experiments to essentially create a super weapon that utilizes the psychosomatic direction of patients in order to make molecules necessary to replicate nanomechs of some sort. It all sounds like a pseudoscience. It sounds like a very dumb pseudoscience. It makes no sense whatsoever, being able to use cells to essentially manufacture nanomechs via psychosomatic direction. Like, Evil Within's whole idea of using the collective consciousness of individuals to create this simulated world makes a lot more sense, and it actually feels very intriguing to explore. But I really feel like the wall rider aspect really doesn't go anywhere in this game, and the wall rider doesn't even appear in Outlast 2. It instead only appears off camera, because the whole moment where Blake essentially gets swallowed up by the sun, what's actually happening is the wall rider is destroying one of the towers that is creating this pulse that is causing everyone who is affected by the pulse to revert to primeval instincts, essentially, where they're just being very mindless, and they're essentially expressing a mentality easily associated with the Middle Ages, or even before the Middle Ages. And that's why they're all really dumb individuals who try to preach religion as just this explanation for everything, and then they're perverting God to justify murder. Like, essentially the religion that's portrayed in Outlast 2 is a more perverted version of Christianity, which I guess is to be expected considering that Christianity is easily the most perverted religion ever, because the kind of things that people just take at face value when it comes to reading certain things from the Bible, they take it very seriously. Like, I know there's a lot of chapters in the Bible, such as in Revelations, where they portray very violent thoughts, and people try to use these passages from the Bible as a way of justifying the horrible things that they do, or just the kind of thought processes that occur whenever they're trying to perpetrate this action that they believe is justified. And personally, I don't really understand why the Bible has to portray all these kind of violent passages. Like, what does it serve? Like, what are you teaching the populace, essentially, when you're trying to showcase the moment where Jezebel gets, like, torn apart by a pack of dogs, or when you're trying to punish homosexuality, or the like, when homosexual people aren't actually that bad? I mean, I just don't understand a lot of the things that these kind of religions embrace. I mean, I'm an atheist, so I wouldn't really know. But enough about that little diversion. Going back to my previous tangent, you know, the wall rider aspect doesn't go anywhere, and the fact that Murkoff is hardly explored in Outlast 2, and you're not really understanding like what exactly is happening when it comes to the tower, that's just causing this pulse to be emitted, that's causing everyone to degenerate to their primal instincts. You know, it really doesn't go anywhere, because what they instead opt for in Outlast 2 is they just try to use that as a framework for their horror, where they don't really make it a focus, and they instead just try to, you know, focus more on all the horrific aspects of Outlast 2, even though Outlast 2 isn't really scary, in all honesty. And the kind of design choices that Outlast 2 embraces, it really causes you to not take the horror seriously in Outlast 2. I mean, that's not true though, because I mean, I do feel like Outlast 2 really changed my perceptions of people and of the world, with the kind of inhumane acts that people are most likely doing from the public's eye, or when it comes to the government potentially doing things that we're not aware of, when it comes to helping out this company that's most likely paid off certain employees of the FBI or the CIA to ensure that they're able to do all these inhumane like testing trials. You know, it is a thing that is happening in the world, I bet. In fact, if such a thing were to be happening out in the deserts of Arizona, where some Satanist group is just underground and just doing all these orgies, and we're just going about our daily lives, like, what exactly are we doing to ensure that people aren't turning out that way? You know, that's one of the things that really fascinates me about serial killers compared to terrorists, because serial killers engage in all sorts of inhumane acts and very secretive acts that really demonstrate the flaws in our so-called perfect society that we tried to create in this world. And this perfect society has, of course, led to a lot of really terrible things that have just gone under the radar. And, you know, the Outlast series does a really good job at portraying that kind of secretive nature to what these kind of corporations do, or to what these different kinds of murderous groups are doing. And I just like the tone in that, and it's an eye-opening experience for me. But we have just skipped that really long cutscene, and thankfully that's the only long cutscene in the game. Outlast 2 embraces way too many long cutscenes. For the most part, in Outlast 2, you're spending more time not engaging with the enemies, and you're spending way more time just going through cutscenes, walking moments, and Chapter 3 especially is the worst chapter in Outlast 2, because you're wasting time just piloting a raft that is poorly controlled, it barely moves, and it lasts way longer than it perhaps should. Like, there's hardly any gameplay in Outlast 2, and it's one of the main reasons why I don't like that game. And going back to the whole idea of Outlast 2 having so many long cutscenes, like, the checkpoints that they utilize for the chapter select system, the checkpoints for the chapter, they can put you before a 5-minute long cutscene. Like, there is a chapter in Chapter 2 where the checkpoint they give you at the very beginning of the chapter is when you're inside of a log, and it's before a 5-minute long cutscene where you have to watch Blake being impaled on a cross, and then he's being hung on it. Who the heck wants to sit through that whenever they want to replay that chapter for the gameplay? Like, I'd almost consider it to be a very arrogant move when the developers are trying to force you to go through all these unskippable moments, because they're like, oh, we put a lot of hard work into it. You should be forced to appreciate our work. That to me just screams arrogance, and contradictory to this, like Naughty Dog with the cutscenes in the Last of Us series. The cutscenes in the Last of Us series are skippable, but I don't like skipping them because I feel like if you skip the cutscenes in the Last of Us series, they impact the pacing because the cutscenes are done so well in the Last of Us series that I feel like they're a core part of the gameplay for all the right reasons. The cutscenes in the Outlast series, they serve absolutely no purpose whatsoever. They're not adding anything to the story. All they're doing is just showing mindless violence and mindless sex. And the mindless violence and the mindless sex in particular make the Outlast series the most violent series out there. By far. I really feel like with the way they portray the violence and the sex on this game, it really causes Outlast to really stand out as being the most violent series out there. And on the sex side, it almost comes across as being a sex toy for perverts, just allowing them to indulge in their sexual fantasies or whatever when it comes to watching specific scenes from the game series. And going back to the violence side, I'm almost half tempted to do a video where I showcase the difference between the violence in this game compared to The Last of Us Part 2, because so many people consider The Last of Us Part 2 to be the most violent game out there. I'm just like, what are you playing at? The violence in The Last of Us Part 2 feels like a rated T game. You know, it doesn't, I mean, it's a lot more gruesome than the first Last of Us, I do agree, but it's censored to such a degree that it doesn't feel as violent as this game. This game is nowhere near as censored as your typical so-called violent game, and I really don't understand the kind of criticisms that The Last of Us Part 2 receives when it comes to its violence. I'm definitely tempted to make such a video comparing the violence on this game compared to The Last of Us Part 2. Because there's so many violent things that happen in the Outlast series, and the thing that makes them a lot more violent compared to games like Doom, where, you know, you're bisecting corpses, this and that, is because in Doom, there's not a lot of detail put into the violence, and, you know, the effects don't look that interesting, and they're so rushed that you don't really have a lot of time to take in everything. And, you know, from the perspective of the protagonist, they view that as just being a joke, that they're just bisecting all these enemies just for the fun of it. But in Outlast, you know, there's a bit of pacing to the violence, there's slowness to the violence that really gives it that sort of impact that makes it feel like a very violent act. You know, there's a reason why a lot of torturers take a very slow approach to violence. It's because that comes across as being very, very shocking to the person who is receiving the torture, or to anyone else who is, say for instance, receiving snuff films of the torture. That's definitely one of the main reasons why I consider this game to be the most violent game I've ever played. And on top of that, the kind of violent things that happen in the game, I mean, there's all sorts of things. Like, you see moments where people get their heads torn off. Your own head can get torn off in a death animation with Chris Walker. I mean, Chris Walker himself gets torn to bits by the Wall Rider. And then you get moments where people are getting stabbed. And then you have moments in the Whistleblower DLC where you're seeing Frank Manera eat all of the patients because he's a cannibal. And then in the final part of the DLC, there is a patient there named Eddie Gluskin who does a lot of sexual torture on his victims because he doesn't have any women to enact his fantasies on, so he tries to convert the men into women by removing their genitalia. And I've never seen any game go that far when it comes to violence, and I honestly question how Red Barrel has managed to obtain the rights necessary to allow this level of violence, because I've never seen anything like it before. Never in any game have I seen any moment where the genitalia of a character in a game gets ripped apart so much. And they even have it where your own penis is shown in the game. How did they manage to get the rights for that? I don't understand how Red Barrels managed to scrape by so easily. Lucky is definitely the term I would associate with Red Barrels, because somehow their game is considered a true survival horror game when it's really a horror simulator. They're able to get away with all this level of violence. They're able to get away with all the sexual content that they portray in the Outlast series. Like, in Outlast 2, you encounter the heretics, which are completely naked individuals, so you can see all their private parts. And there's even a moment near the end of the game where the heretics are engaging in an orgy to celebrate the birth of the Antichrist, which is what your wife is essentially giving birth to. And that somehow got past the censorship. Like, how do you do this? Like, I've never seen any developer scrape by that easily. Never in any other game do they include moments like that. That's just unbelievable. And I honestly feel like that orgy scene was there just as a way for Red Barrels to apologize to the fan base for portraying the kind of sexual violence that they did in Outlast the Whistleblower DLC. And it adds nothing to the horror. If you were just a perverted individual, you would just forget all the horrible things that occurred in Outlast 2, and you'd just be watching what's been happening in the orgy. And it really makes you question the integrity of individuals, and it really makes you question the humanity of individuals. When the amount of people that commented on that scene, and they're like, oh, I can't wait to get down on this, it really makes you question where society is at this point. And it's just become a simple, mindless, base community of individuals who make up such a vast majority of the population. And oh my god, like Ted Bundy, when he was on death row and he was talking about the whole idea of pornography just being a major aspect of what causes serial killers to be made, you know, he made this statement and he said, don't burn Catcher in the Rye, burn Hustler. Hustler is a sex site for a lot of individuals, and you know, I did kind of see the site, and the kind of things they showed, very disturbing and just gross and absolutely disgusting. I don't blame Ted Bundy for feeling that way. And do you want to know the worst part about it? So many people just saw Ted Bundy's statement and they just laughed it off, saying that there's no way pornography could be linked to anything like that. But I don't think they really understand the kind of impact a really bad childhood can have in just allowing the hypothalamus to completely lose control and just allowing the individual to explore all their deep, dark thoughts of sexual fantasies. And all pornography serves to do at that point is just completely exacerbate that and make it even worse. You know, there's a reason why Catcher in the Rye is considered to be popular with a lot of killers. It's because the main character, Holden, has a lot of trouble coping with the inner desires that he has, and a lot of his inner desires are sexual in nature. And that's why Catcher in the Rye has oftentimes been linked to a lot of really dangerous killers. I wonder if anyone in Red Barrel has actually read Catcher in the Rye and somehow got the idea to do a completely sexual scene in the game as a way of creating shock in the viewer. Because that'd be very sadistic. You know, that's definitely something that the violence on this game does compared to the GTA series. Because, I mean, the Grand Theft Auto is way more violent than, like, The Last of Us Part 2. And the violence on that game doesn't really do anything because, I mean, you're playing as assholes in a completely lawless world where, you know, you're supposed to interpret the violence as being a joke. But, you know, the fact that you're playing as a completely scared protagonist in the Outlast series really makes him understand just how gruesome the violence is, and it definitely elicits a reaction in him. But, you know, it's not properly expressed that well because a lot of the violence on this game can be very mindless, and a lot of the sexual encounters can be very mindless, as I've already explained, and it's almost like they're there to pacify 13-year-olds. But in certain situations, it's not the case. You know, that's definitely something I definitely feel like Red Barrels did properly with this game. I think they definitely took the darker side of humanity and they really brought it out with this game. And they also were able to showcase what exactly happens when you dwell too much on the positive side of the spectrum when it comes to human behavior, because Murkoff dwells so much on the positive side, always trying to view the positives to all the inhumane acts that they're doing, and that's why they're making sure that they're paying off a lot of the governments. I mean, I would assume Murkoff's been paying off governments, because there's no way the kind of acts that they're doing could be under the radar. They would have been exposed so long ago, but they haven't. So that's specifically why Wayland Park contacts Miles Upshur to expose Murkoff for what it is. And going back to what I was saying, you know, Murkoff, they were living in a delusional fantasy. You know, people who dwell on the positive side of the spectrum of human behavior, they dwell in the delusional fantasy. They're practically no different to what you'd see in a normal individual who tries to put aside violence and all the darker things in humanity and all the terrible things that are likely happening outside the public's eye as just being, like, nothing to worry about. But that's the wrong thing you want to do, and that's precisely why Miles Upshur and Wayland Park tried to expose Murkoff for what it is. I mean, Wayland was questioning whether it was truly worth doing so, but Miles was just, like, committed, because, I mean, he's definitely more of a brazen character compared to Wayland Park. But I'm gonna have to pause on this tangent right now because we're currently in an encounter one of the variants. There are 3 variants here, and only one of them will come after you, depending on which fuse you pick up. I always pick up the fuse in that room there, and then I just start to run with this guy, because the stealth on this game, and also in the rest of the Outlast series, is just awful. The lack of stealth options just... it gives the enemies an artificial handicap. It almost makes it seem like the main character is allowing the enemies to do whatever they want, and that's just there to artificially create a terrifying experience. Like, if you're not going to give the main character the ability to fight back, then at least make it so that he has a lot more options than stealth. That way I can understand how he managed to get past a whole entire onslaught of killers to get from point A to point B. You know, just waiting around for the enemy to do whatever they want, and at times they can be very omniscient with what they do. You know, it's really stupid, and like I mentioned before, it's just an artificial handicap, and it makes you not respect the lethality of the enemies enough when they're just allowed to do whatever they want, all because the main character's allowing it. It's just really stupid that it works like that. Like, can you imagine in Alien Isolation if you had no way of distracting the Xenomorph? That game would honestly be horrible, because the Xenomorph is so omniscient on that game, and the fact that you can use the maintenance jack and the noisemakers and all other kinds of distractions to your advantage when it comes to getting past the Xenomorph is one of the main reasons why that game can be a lot of fun to do, and it makes you respect the lethality of the Xenomorph to a greater degree compared to the enemies in the Outlast series. And speaking of Alien Isolation, I'm actually doing a walkthrough of Alien Isolation. I've completely finished the game, and all I need to do now is just the commentary. And there is a lot to say about Alien Isolation. I mean, it's a fun game, but it's very buggy, and the bugs need to be explained in Alien Isolation, and also some of the other problems that game has, as I fall through the floor right here. Which, if you time your jump properly, you can avoid that, but if you fall, you'll have to climb up these set of beds over here, and just proceed onward. And then there's going to be a moment where the two naked guys are going to be in front of you, but they're so easy to avoid because they're incredibly slow enemies. You know, I really question some of the placements of the enemies in this game. Like, before I even got up to the 3rd floor, there was a variant coming out of a door, and I'm already past him, so like, what is the whole point of putting him there? And it's the same case with these two guys. I'm already past them, and they can't jump, they can't run, all they do is just walk. I mean, I really question their whole point as an enemy type. And we're about to lose the camera right here. And the good thing about this section is the game illuminates the path for you, seeing as how you don't have your camcorder. In fact, I wonder if it's actually possible to proceed onward without your camera, because in all essence, guys, you can get through Outlast without ever needing your camcorder if you adjust your TV settings correctly so that it's just very bright for you. I mean, I didn't do it for this walkthrough, I just decided to be very reliant upon the camera. I mean, a lot of people have done runs on the Outlast series without using the camcorder or without using the night vision feature. In fact, there's even a trophy in Outlast 2 where you have to beat insane difficulty without reloading the camcorder. So you have to deal with very limited night vision, and I just think it's a very stupid trophy because it forces you to adjust your TV settings to accommodate for such a trophy. So I'm not going to be doing such a restriction for my walkthrough because I don't want to indulge in the game's stupidity when it's embracing such a stupid design choice with its trophy. But there's going to be 3 variants on your left, but they can never catch you because, you know, they're nowhere near as fast as you are. And you have a limited sprint in Outlast 1 and Outlast the Whistleblower. And in Outlast 2, they made it so that you have a stamina penalty, and I don't really understand how you can give the main character a stamina penalty when the enemies don't have any kind of stamina penalty in Outlast 2, and they run at light speed on that game. Once again, the Outlast series embraces a lot of artificial handicaps with its enemy types, and it really undermines their lethality a lot, and I have no respect for them whatsoever. But now I've retrieved the camcorder. That took seconds. This game is not very difficult. It's just there to be an immersive experience. I mean, this game even supports the whole option for VR, so you can clearly tell the immersion aspect was what was important compared to the actual difficulty of the game. And to be honest, though, I don't really see how you can make the Outlast series difficult in the way that's actually difficult for all the right reasons, because the Outlast series is just very simple in its designs. I mean, the implementation of dodging in the Outlast series, you know, maybe the developers could make it where the enemies can do different attacks and you have to read their attacks differently so that you can get past them. And there could have been other mechanics like that. And, you know, if they actually put in scenarios where you're forced to fight back and you have to be very creative with the way you utilize the mechanics, then maybe they could structure the difficulty differently. But unfortunately, with how simple Outlast designs are, they're just opting for a very simple design where they just remove all of the checkpoints and they just set it on Nightmare difficulty where the enemies kill you very quickly. And one thing that Nightmare difficulty does in Outlast 1, and this is not the case in Outlast 2, is it limits your batteries. So you're only able to carry 2 batteries on Nightmare and Insane difficulty on Outlast 1 and the Whistleblower DLC, but in Outlast 2, you can carry up to 6 batteries, I believe, but it's pretty pointless for that to be the case because the night vision in Outlast 2 lasts for a very long time before you're forced to reload, whereas in Outlast 1 and the Whistleblower DLC, the night vision really drains the battery. But it still doesn't change the difficulty of the game because the Outlast series utilizes a system where if you don't have batteries available to you at the moment, it will spawn in batteries very, very close to you in areas that previously didn't have batteries, but now they did. So you might have noticed that before I got outside of Mount Massive Asylum and I was in the courtyard, I reloaded my battery, and because I did that, 2 batteries spawned within the elevator, so you can use that to your advantage in order to strategically spawn in batteries, and it's the same case in Outlast 2. I mean, in Outlast 2, I think there are less batteries, but again, it's pointless because your night vision lasts for such a long time, and you don't even need the night vision for a lot of situations if you have your TV settings turned up to a particular setting, and there are certain situations in Outlast 2 where you can look up at the sky and just see the path that you're supposed to take, and this is especially handy in chapters 1 and 2 of Outlast 2, where you're in between cliff sides, and you can use the cliff sides to map out the path you're supposed to take in order to save up on your night vision. Of course, memorization still helps as well, with knowing when you're supposed to take this turn or just go in this direction. I use this a lot when I'm in the mines of Outlast 2, because I use the lights as reference to indicate when I'm supposed to turn. So I have a light behind me, I start moving towards a dark area, and then I know, because I passed that light at that particular moment, I can turn to the right, and I just know that the path is there, because I see another light and I just head right for it. And the Outlast series does utilize a lot of lighting as a way of indicating the correct path. Of course, there are times when it can be a little misleading, but it can be very helpful at times in knowing which direction you're supposed to go. But we've now picked up the key to exit the area, and one of the naked guys is going to bust through the door, but I'm just going to run past them. That's a useful trick right there. Whenever the enemies are busting open doors, and you're on the other side of the door, when they bust through, because they gain so much forward momentum, you can run past them. Of course, it doesn't work on Chris Walker, as I've already explained in the first chapter of this game, because his active frame period lasts for a very long time. So that's why you need to stand in front of the door when he busts through it, so that you can get past him, and you're not being affected by his active frame data, because you've already been affected by it at that instance. This same trick also works in Outlast 2, only there isn't any moment where an enemy type has their active frame period extended for a very long time, because there aren't that many fat enemies. And the thing with Chris Walker's door-breaking animation is it's a slightly different animation to what the enemies normally do when it comes to prepping their animation. And the enemies take roughly 6 hits before they actually break open the door. With Chris Walker, it takes 3 hits, because of course he's a stronger enemy. Some enemies will just open the door normally. This is the case with Traeger, and also with Eddie Gluskin. And when they're opening the door normally, you can actually run past them, because they can't cancel the animation. It works in every case where they're pulling and pushing doors. So that can be useful, but there's never a need to use it. But I've now picked up the key that will allow us to gain access to the elevator, and you might have noticed that we've been doing a lot of fetch quests, pretty much. We've been picking up keys, we've been picking up fuses, we've been picking up all sorts of things. It definitely gets very repetitive once you notice it, but I think with the faster pace that this game takes compared to normal horror simulator games like Soma and Amnesia, you don't really think about it as much, because you're just losing yourself to the swift pace of this game with how fast you run. You know, this game isn't difficult, and because of that, I play this game without audio, and I find one of the things I do like about this game is when I'm listening to a very fast-paced song, this game is very accommodating for that, because it's a very fast-paced game, and it's the same with Outlast 2. And yeah, that right there was Chris Walker's section done. And I do feel like they use a lot of the same variants a lot, and it definitely displays a lack of confidence with introducing a new kind of variant. That right there's a loading screen. That's just one of the few loading screens I've decided not to cut out, because why not? I don't know why the PS4 version has those loading screens, because this game it's not beautiful. I mean, it looks like something out of the PS3 era, but why does it need those loading screens? I mean, the PC version doesn't have any loading screens. This just seems rather confusing that a game like this would need loading screens like that. And Outlast 2 doesn't have them, but I think that mainly has to do with the fact that Outlast 2 favors a lot of unskippable cutscenes and walking moments, and because there's so many of them, they're probably hiding loading screens. And you're not in as much gameplay, unfortunately, because of that. And I'm hoping with this new age of consoles coming that consoles like the PS5 are going to finally remove loading screens. You know, the SSDs are going to be very helpful in reducing a lot of the loading screens. And from what I've seen of some of the tech demos that they've shown on the PS5, it looks promising. But I think that's more so about false sense of security, because if games are going to be embracing such high-end graphics, and graphics seem to be the case with a lot of these new games coming out, and not a lot of games I've seen so far, aside from Resident Evil 8, are really stretching the margin on PS5, and instead they're favoring, 1998 style games or 2000 era style games, and I'm just very disappointed from the list of games currently shown. And I'm only going to be impressed with a game if it actually stretches the margin, and when it comes to stretching the margin and reaching the sky as the limit, Resident Evil is the greatest example of this. And Resident Evil 8, I am so looking forward to Resident Evil 8, and they promise it's going to be the darkest and most gruesome entry of the series, and I cannot wait to see what they do with the horror on that game. But we're now encountering the Wall Rider, and it's a really dumb section. I think that for a final encounter, this is just very lackluster. They do nothing different with the Wall Rider to make him feel different from the other enemies you've been encountering. It's just the same thing that you've been doing, of just running away from enemies, going from point A to point B. Like, they could have done something very interesting. They could have introduced some really interesting mechanics with the Wall Rider, but they didn't, because the Wall Rider will kill you instantly, and because of that, you have to be incredibly fast. There are lots of ways of actually skipping certain moments so that you can get to certain sections of a room faster, and I'm about to demonstrate it coming up. So in this room coming up, there is a valve that you need to turn, and when you turn the valve, the Wall Rider will spawn near the valve, and if you're going down the normal path, he's going to catch up to you very quickly. But I saw a speedrunner jump over a railing and land on a canister, and it allowed him to skip the stairs and gain a greater distance from the Wall Rider, and I'm going to do that in this video, because this section is just so lackluster. I just wanted to be done very quickly. Like I said before, the whole Wall Rider idea just wasn't going anywhere. They didn't even include the Wall Rider in the Whistleblower DLC, aside from one moment where you just run away from it, but you just go through a door, and it stops chasing you. It doesn't bother following you into the room and slaughtering everyone in there. It just goes away. Just like that moment when I was outside, and the Wall Rider attacked Miles, but didn't kill him. Why it didn't kill him, I don't understand. It's just a lucky pass moment, just to somehow allow the story to progress. Like, they couldn't think of anything differently to do with him in that section. And it's just clear that this lack of imagination of what to do with the Wall Rider translated into this section right here. And going back to the Whistleblower DLC, I mean, they do put the Wall Rider in another cinematic moment where Miles has been fully taken over by the Wall Rider, and he kills one of the main antagonists of the Outlast Whistleblower DLC. But aside from that, nothing important happens with the Wall Rider whatsoever. Seeing as how the third game in the series, the Outlast Trials, is taking place during the Cold War era, so it takes place before any of these games happened, I'm just wondering what they're going to do with that game, because there's no way they're going to bring in the Wall Rider in for that game. And they're probably just going to focus on, the patience that are just being experimented on by Murkoff once again. That's definitely something that they seem to be rectifying with Outlast 2, because a lot of people complain that Outlast 2 was a little too open, and the enemies just weren't that intriguing. They didn't feel as terrifying as some of the enemies you encounter in Outlast 1. And they're definitely favoring the narrow spaces again. I'm just wondering if the gameplay is going to be taking influences from Outlast 2 with sliding and going prone and just moving very fast. I imagine the stamina penalty will be coming back, which is definitely something I'm not looking forward to, because I just think the stamina penalty in Outlast 2 made that game very tedious, and you just had to do a lot of waiting, and it didn't really impact the flow of the chase sequences. And speaking of sequences, we have this rather pointless sequence, which I don't know what this is adding. I don't know why the Wall Rider isn't trying to kill Miles right now. It's just allowing him to get down safely. But whatever. Lucky passes. I I think the next time I see a cutscene in an Outlast game, I'm just going to chant Lucky Pass whenever I see a cutscene, because I know the main character is just going to scrape by so easily. And once you hit the failsafe, that will be the end of the game, and you just gotta escape. So that has been my Outlast 1 walkthrough. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.